everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us for the first of what we hope to be several episodes of iPEC's new Experiences series. I'm Tonya Echols, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Strategist and Lead Trainer for iPEC, and I am so excited to continue our collective journey toward creating a more inclusive and just world through iPEC's mission of raising the consciousness of the world one person at a time. The purpose of the Experiences series is to break through the literal and figurative barriers that can separate us through the power of sharing our experiences. The more we learn and understand about one another, the more difficult it is to create division and exclusion and discrimination. By sharing our unique experiences, we learn to better embrace one another's differences while also connecting even more deeply to our shared humanity. So I'm so excited right now to introduce you to our first guest in the series today, Gemma Naturkach, an ICF graduate, coach, and author who is joining us today. Yes, your author who's joining us for a conversation about how her life experiences have shaped her who, most recently the impact of evacuating Ukraine with her family and how that has led to her commitment to raise awareness about refugees around the world, which is especially appropriate as we recognize World Refugee Day today. So welcome everyone, and Gemma, welcome and thank you for agreeing to share your experiences with us.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and there's so much that I want to share that I've learned, so I'm really excited about it.
Thank you so much for being here. Well, let's not wait any longer. Let's dive in. Okay. You and your family, I know, have been through so much over the past several months. However, let's back up a little bit in time and learn a bit about your background and how your life's journey led to the recent events as you evacuated Ukraine.
Yeah, so I mean, for anybody that has met me and knows me a little bit, like my life has been kind of crazy, but I was born in the United States, and to give a little background, my daughter was born in Ecuador and my husband was born in Ukraine. So we are a third culture family. But growing up in the United States, you know, I experienced United States as it is with, you know, what is expected to be a citizen and like racism and all of these things that go with the United States. And I felt really embarrassed to be an American. And it's a weird thought considering I was also in the United States Army. Mm-hmm. So most people are like, wait, but that's like the most patriotic thing that you can do is to like be in the Army. And at the same time, I was really embarrassed of being in the Army. And so I ended up leaving the United States a few different times to travel, but I went to live abroad in Ecuador because I was just like having some medical issues and things like that. And it was time for me to leave. And so I moved abroad. My daughter was actually born abroad. We briefly moved back to the United States, but then I was miserable again. And so I ended up moving to Ukraine because my husband is Ukrainian. And then I was living there for years. So that's how I got to Ukraine. And I genuinely loved it. There's nothing perfect with any country in the world. And that's one thing that I've learned through traveling. But there was a lot that I did love about Ukraine, and I still have family and friends there. And I learned a lot from living there about the Soviet style culture and Eastern European style of living. And it is vastly different from the United States. So that's how I came to be in Ukraine. And now we evacuated and we're living in Wisconsin. So very different.
In the US, right? Yeah, back and around. What was that experience like as you were deciding with your family what to do, when to leave, if you were going to evacuate?
Well, it was really hard because for us, leading up to the moments of the invasion, there was nothing different in Ukraine because Ukraine had already been at war with Russia for many years. So most of it happened on the east, closer to Russia. But you hear about people dying on the front lines and things like that. but it wasn't something that impacted all of Ukraine. And to give a little bit of an example, Ukraine is about the size of Texas. So it's also one of the largest countries in Europe. So, I mean, it's pretty big. But we never really thought anything was going to happen. And so the months leading up, like the US embassy would say, hey, you know, there's increased threats from Russia. And like the weeks before we decided to leave, I had so many friends that were like, why are you in Ukraine? I'm like, I just ordered Domino's pizza. Like there's nothing different here that would suspect us. And also there was a really big difference between the media aspect of it, because Western media, like English speaking media, especially, there were a lot of concerns about that, you know, what's going to happen with Russia. But Ukrainian media is either controlled by Russia or it's Ukrainian. So there wasn't anything being reported until like the day of the invasion. So that was a really big difference. And for me, it was really difficult because it was like, oh my goodness, like, hey, all of these things are happening. What do I do? And I would tell my friends and my family in Ukraine, like, hey, you know, United States is saying that something is going to happen. Maybe we should be prepared or leave or something. And they're like, you know, this has been happening for years. Nothing is going to like escalate. And where are we supposed to go anyway? We live here. And that was kind of my first like, oh yeah, moment, because it was like, wow, I do have the opportunity to go somewhere else. Everybody else that's Ukrainian, they live here. They can't just pack up and move. This is their home. So it was really hard. And I ended up getting interviewed by American media, and they completely edited everything that we discussed. And that was another wake-up call for me, because when I actually saw the news broadcast of it, they show me talking about like what I was fearful of. And then they showed like, they cut to like Russian tanks in the background. And it looked so scary. Even when I saw it, I was like, I've never seen like a Russian tank here. So it was very eye-opening for me how they actually manipulate the media. And that's when I was like, okay, we have Russian propaganda, we have American propaganda, and then there's Ukrainian propaganda. So I had never really had that experience before. And it was really eye-opening to kind of see like how different people reported it. And also you have translations in the United States media of what they're saying in Russian and Ukrainian. And we're like, yeah, that's not accurate either. So it was so much that really went into it.
Yeah, we talk about interpretations, right? We talk a lot about it, IPEC, about the stories that we create. And when you're living in the middle of it, and then you're getting these different interpretations for whatever other, you know, motives and agendas that may be behind that, it can be extremely confusing as to which one is the one, and how do I make these decisions for my family? So it makes sense that you would have had that sense of, wait, what's happening, and what is true and what isn't true. And you also mentioned, once you recognize, wait a minute, actually, I do have an option as a United States citizen to come back and do that. But then you also mentioned earlier some of that embarrassment that you had around what we know is the dichotomy that exists within the U.S. I'm a Southerner. I'm from the southeastern region of the U.S. and I love my country. And I also am aware, as an African-American woman who was raised in the South by parents who grew up under Jim Crow, that there are a lot of challenges, as you said, in every country around that. So what led that, or what really caused you to kind of make that decision to say, okay, we're going to go back to the U.S.?
Yeah, so we were thinking like, okay, maybe we'll just go to Poland for just a little bit of time, and when things calm down, we'll return. And then what happened was Russia had actually hacked our banking system in Ukraine, and we couldn't access our bank. And it was a moment where we were like, oh my goodness, like this is real. Like this is absolutely real now. And then I said to my husband, I was like, I know that like this is difficult because my husband couldn't go to the United States because he wasn't a US citizen, because we are, you know, three different nationalities. And so that was one of the things that we had to consider. And also we had to consider COVID regulations at the time, because Poland was actually open to Ukrainian citizens, but not United States citizens by land. So that means I couldn't actually enter Poland at the time. So we were like, maybe we'll go to Slovakia or Hungary. So there was a lot of planning that went into it, which made the decision to leave more difficult, because it was like, we're going to go through all of this and what, nothing. And so once the banks were hacked, I said, let's just go and figure out what's going to happen. And then in the middle of the night, the Department of State called, because I was registered with the embassy. And they said, United States citizens need to evacuate. And if you don't within the next 48 hours, then we're not going to be able to help you. And that was a big eye opener, because they had actually already left the state capital or the country capital of Kyiv. They had already left, and then they were actually evacuating to Poland as well. And when we got that phone call, it was like, okay, let's go. And so that was really the decision that prompted us, like the hacking of the banks and then the call from the Department of the State is what motivated us to say, okay, we're leaving. So we said, okay, we can't just abandon, right? Because like evacuation doesn't mean abandon. So we had to take care of the things that we were responsible for. We had to speak to the owner, and he was kind of upset because the owner's like, why are you leaving? Like nothing's going to happen. But we decided, okay, we're just going to go. So that was 2 days before the invasion. We got to Poland, and it was one of those really strange situations going towards the border, because it felt more like a vacation than anything. We all packed 4 suitcases, and the rest of the stuff went with my mother-in-law. And we had a dog as well, and we left her with my mother-in-law. And so 4 suitcases, and it was like just a vacation to Poland. And when we were sitting at the border, you started hearing things more on the media. And that's when I started to become like more scared. And 3 hours, well, no, it took us 4 hours to actually get through border security and everything like that. And it was just sitting there, you see the Poland flag and you see the Ukrainian flag, and you're just sitting there like, wow, if they do attack, there's just an imaginary border that separates us. Like really what's going to stop a rocket from hitting Poland? Like, is this really safer? And so that was a scary moment as well, but we made it to Poland and we stayed in an Airbnb. And like I said, by the time we got to our Airbnb, it was the day before the full-scale invasions. And we woke up in the morning. I actually woke up really early. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. And of course, I checked the media like most people do. And then we saw that it had happened. And I woke up my husband, and it was just like, whoa, like, oh my gosh. Because when that happened, the president of Ukraine implemented martial law. So men 16 to 60 could not leave. So it was like my husband left. And so I automatically felt so thankful, because I was like, we're safe. And then I felt so guilty, because it was like, we just left everybody. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it was trying to get a hold of like family and friends and make sure they were okay. And it was like, what do we do now? Because before it was like a vacation, like a mini vacation, but now we didn't have a home to go to. Like if we re-entered Ukraine, my husband could potentially get, sent off to the military. Or, I mean, what do we do? So that was kind of like, now we're stuck in Poland. Do we have enough money to continue staying here? Because I can only stay on these visas for a certain amount of time as an American, because I don't get afforded the same rights as maybe a Ukrainian refugee would, right? So they would have extended stay, however, I would not. So it was like, oh my gosh, what do we do? There's so much to consider.
Yeah, the
But
complexity of that. It's just with all three of you having different nationalities to some degree, and what you were able to do and your daughter versus your husband, and who had refugee status and who didn't, and how are you processing all this energetically with all these different emotions and the guilt and the fear and the confusion?
one thing we're taught during IPEC is like all of these levels of emotion. There, emotions aren't necessarily good or bad, right? But they have their advantages and disadvantages. So that's one thing that really came to me, as far as like, I would process every level of emotion within like a 5-minute range, because it was just so overwhelming. And I didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't know what to process first, because there was just so much of it. And I think, for me, guilt was probably the biggest one at first, because it was like, wow, like we just left everybody. They can't leave anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was like a really hard one. But even now, they're still there, and we hope that they're okay. But yeah, just like now, you go through every emotions just so quickly. And again, I'm really thankful that we were able to leave, because now we can try to do more, I think, to support them, because we do have like a situation where financially we're stable. So it's like, okay, what can I do in this moment? Right? Like that's the big one. What can I do in this moment? So the first thing was, we have to get somewhere permanent. And we ended up applying for my husband to get a green card expedited. And then we went to the embassy in Poland, and we got a green card expedited in like a month and a half. It was so fast. But very, very thankful for that. A big emotion that came up for me when we were at the embassy was, we were standing in line, and there was so many Russians in line at the US embassy trying to come to America. And I was so angry. Like, I was like, why am I standing in line behind these Russians? And in that moment, I felt anger, and I also felt like shame, because I was like, this is the first time in my life I have ever like felt hatred towards a group of people. And I was like, wow, like that's huge for me. Like, I didn't know really how to process it. And so we're in Poland, we get our green card, and I'm writing this book, through the process. And the company calls me to tell me, okay, we have a great editor for you. And I see his name, and he's Russian. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I was like, is this a joke? And so then I had to process that, because it was like, okay, if I continue working with this person, is it like a slap in my face, or a slap in the face to my family? Like, how are they going to feel about that? If I'm working with this person, am I financially supporting the war because he's getting paid to work with me? So am I just putting money in like Russia's pockets? So it was a lot to consider. And I think in the beginning, I was like, you know what? I'm going to work with him, because I want him to feel torture as he reads my book, because I'm writing about the evacuation process. So that was one of the things, that anger was actually the motivator to get me to work with him in the end, because I was like, I hope that he suffers as he reads this. And then I spoke to some of my other Russian friends, and they would message me, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so embarrassed to be Russian. And I'm like, I don't care if you're embarrassed to be Russian right now. Like, why aren't you posting on social media? But they went so quiet. They didn't want to talk. And that also gave me so much anger. And then I had a friend from Finland actually send me a link to a video from a Russian professor living in Finland. And I watched it, and watching his video, actually, I connected with him without even knowing him. But my anger was actually overcome by the people that I was angry at. So that was kind of an interesting thing that happened. But then I was like, okay, you know what? These people are dying too. Like, Russia is using them, as just cannon fodder, pretty much. They're just going in and dying for no reason. And so while I believe that there is some degree of blame, where do you put it? Like, is it on the Russian government? Is it on Ukrainian government? Where is it going? And throughout the process, it was so much that I learned, because I had friends that were contacting me. And one of my friends from Jamaica, she was like, Gemma, I saw this video about, this girl trying to leave, and then she was like pushed off by the guards, and she was a person of color. She was, I believe, Nigerian or something like that. And she's like, is that true? And I can't sit here and like romanticize the war and say like, oh yes, Ukraine is perfect.
Yeah.
Because as much as I love Ukraine, like, the fact is Eastern Europe is very racist. Like, absolutely. So I can't say that, oh, no, that wouldn't happen. Right. And so I had to tell her, I was like, well, it's very possible. Very, very possible, because there is racism. And then she's like, well, I don't know if I support this war now. And it's like, well, if you support it or not, it's still happening. And I ended up learning so much more just from that conversation, because then it was like, oh, well, now it's even more of a problem, because there's a global food shortage, and who is it affecting the most? It's affecting people of color, because in Africa and the Middle East, they're suffering really horribly right now because there's no food.
Yeah.
Americans haven't seen that yet. Maybe we've seen some gas prices go up and people are complaining, but they haven't felt the effects of that. And so it's just been such an interesting process, because there's really so much to unpack, and it's hard to do that, especially in like a 30-minute time period. But more importantly, like, as you're going through the process, it's hard to unpack all of that, because it's like, where do you even start? Because there's just so much that goes into it. And even being here, like, when you asked me to join you on World Refugee Day, it was like, whoa, here's another iPEC concept that I was like, I have to realize we need to define things and what they mean for us, because I had never defined what a refugee was before I became one. And even still, that's a hard thing for me to process, because I want to minimize that. I want to say, you know what? I didn't need humanitarian aid, so I'm not really a refugee. So, it really depends on how you define some of these things, because there are people that are like, well, you were without a home, you were displaced, so you're a refugee. And in the same sense, like, during this whole process, there's been so many people that have been wonderful and they've wanted to help us. And I'm like, financially, we are okay. We don't need help, but I will tell you where you can donate, because there are people that genuinely need it. I didn't lose my home because it was bombed, right? Like, those things didn't happen to me, but I can raise awareness for people that are happening, like for who those are happening too, right?
Because it's happening all over the world. And again, what does refugee mean? Because even within your own family, your husband was technically a refugee, but you weren't, as a U.S. citizen and a veteran, and then your daughter as well, and just all of these different pieces. So I know there's just so much to process, and especially not having had any experience. Who's had any experience doing any of this? So it's understandable that would just be so many different emotions, but we heard all of them. We heard the level 1 in the guilt. We heard the level 2 in the anger. We heard some of that level 4 with wanting to take care of others. We're hearing level 3 of let me get along and try to work with this editor. And then we hear also tapping into some of that more anabolic energy, and even level 5 and level 6 of hearing that Russian professor in Finland, and recognizing that, you have friends who are Russian, and getting the call from your friend in Jamaica. So all of these different things coming together, it's a lot to process. And having had your experience with iPEC, you kind of understand how that can be a challenge when you think about clients, when you think about the people that you're working with. What is your biggest takeaway from this experience as you think about how you're learning about yourself and your who?
I think that I mean, there were so many, really. I think that a lot of the things that we learned in iPEC that I learned in iPEC as a student really came to light through this process. And it did help me in a way manage, because I wouldn't stay in one level for so long because I knew this isn't where I want to be. But I think the biggest takeaway for me was really the fact that the people that I started to hate were the ones that helped me overcome that. And, you know, I genuinely went from not enjoying my time with my editor to actually enjoying my time with my editor throughout this process. And I've valued his insights into what it is. And then hearing, like, he's like, yeah, you know, he lives in California and his family is still in Russia. And he's like, you know, my mom is just eating up all of this propaganda in Russia. And I'm trying to tell her and she just doesn't listen. And then I was able to reconnect it back to myself, because I remembered, you know what? I was in Ukraine and the United States kept telling me, like, hey, all of this stuff is going to happen. And nobody would believe me because they're like, oh, no, it's not going to happen. So having like that come back to me and say, you know what? Like, I felt that too, in a very minimal way. I didn't grow up in the propaganda, but in the very minimal way. And so it makes me feel a little bit of compassion there. And it makes me say, you know what, instead of judging an entire group of people, because I shouldn't be doing that, I just need to be connecting with people on an individual basis. And that's where I'm going to get the most influence and also, you know, the most learning from, because each of the people that I met from Russia are very different. But every single person that I have met and spoke with from Russia, they say they're against the war, and I believe them. So for me, having that epiphany, I guess, that the same people that I was starting to hate was the people that helped me out of that, really made me wonder, like, about other things. When we have prejudices against people, the only way I feel like now that I can get over that is to genuinely connect with the people or the thing that I have prejudices against, because you never know, like, what's going to happen. And so that for me was probably the most, like, eye-opening throughout the whole process.
Gemma, I can't begin to tell you how much we appreciate you sharing your experience and how you process that, and how iPEC and the learning that you got through the work you've done has allowed you to at least begin to start to kind of navigate these waters. So again, I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us today. And we wish you and your family and your husband's family and everyone around the world who is displaced and who is uncertain and who is in fear, to know that hopefully we can start to create change. And part of that, just as you said, Gemma, is having these kinds of conversations, sharing our experiences, sharing our real stories. And it's harder to hate someone. It's harder to discriminate and have prejudice when you know the other human. And that's what I hope we've hopefully done for folks who've been watching us today. So thank you so much, Gemma. Thank you all who've joined us today, either live or if you're watching this later. And if you are interested in being perhaps a guest on the Experiences series, we're going to drop a link here in the chat for you so you can submit an application, and hopefully we will do more of these. And again, Gemma, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for watching us, and we will hopefully see you again soon. Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We see you in the chat there. Thank you. And there is the link for those of you who want to submit an application to become a guest on Experiences. Please join us. Thank you all. Bye, Gemma. Be safe.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.